So today we're going to be talking about the UFC's middleweight division. On screen we have got the middleweight champion in Dricus du Plessis. We're then going to move on to who are Dricus' toughest matchups in the middleweight division. Then we're going to move on to two overrated ranked UFC middleweights in my opinion. Then two underrated UFC ranked middleweights in my opinion. And then finally, we're going to be talking about two up-and-coming UFC middleweight prospects that you need to keep an eye on. Starting off with the champion in Dricus du Plessis. 3 years ago, if you had said DDP would have even been top 5 in the middleweight division, you would have been laughed at. I mean, this guy looks like he is fighting underwater, but he is one of the most well-rounded fighters on the UFC's roster right now. Definitely a top 5 pound for pounder in my opinion, and I'm going to say it. He is one win off being the greatest middleweight of all time, in my opinion. A lot of people will not agree with that, but I think we're coming into a time now where names on resumes have to be accounted for, maybe a bit more than how many title defenses you have against plumbers. And that's not me saying Anderson Silva's whole title reign was against plumbers. Absolutely not. He has got some really good wins on his resume. In fact, I would have DDP as the third best middleweight as we stand right now. But if he is able to beat Khamzat Chimaev whenever they fight, I think there's an argument that DDP at that point would be the greatest middleweight of all time, beating the likes of Robert Whittaker, Strickland twice, Israel Adesanya as well, and then if he beats Khamzat Chimaev, I think there's an argument after that he is the greatest middleweight champion of all time. But let's get on to who I think are his toughest matchups in the middleweight division. Starting off with the obvious one, it's Khamzat Chimaev. Look, we know Khamzat is going to be fighting Dricus du Plessis next. I think Khamzat Chimaev is going to beat Dricus du Plessis inside 2 rounds. I want DDP to win. I just think he'll be better for the UFC, a lot more active. He's more fun to watch. But I think Khamzat Chimaev's fighting style, his grappling in particular, Khamzat Chimaev is the deadliest first round fighter in UFC history in my opinion. I think this guy is an absolute wrecking machine, especially early on in the fight. Obviously coming off a really impressive win over Robert Whittaker, where he literally, quite literally, broke Robert Whittaker's face in the very first round. I'll hold my hands up. I was one of those people thinking Robert Whittaker was going to outlast Khamzat Chimaev, was going to scramble well with him and then beat him up later on in the fight. Just didn't happen. And it's not even if Khamzat really set up his shot well on Robert Whittaker. The guy just dove right away, low down on the legs, just out-muscled him, outworked him in the grappling, instantly got to his back, and then broke his face. That is literally what happened. Before that, obviously, he has that majority decision win over Kamaru Usman. Kamaru Usman, obviously a former UFC welterweight champion, took the fight on short notice, was on a losing streak going into this matchup against Khamzat, had a really good account of himself. I actually thought this fight should have been scored a draw. I thought Khamzat had a very dominant first round. Don't know if it was 10-8 worthy, to be honest. Was a very dominant round, don't get me wrong. But Kamaru Usman came on really strong at the end of the fight against Khamzat. Khamzat did break his hand, I believe, in the matchup against Kamaru Usman. Then before that, this was a welterweight matchup against Kevin Holland. It was a bit of a shit show, this matchup. It was meant to be him versus Nate Diaz. How anybody was going to sanction that fight between Khamzat and Nate Diaz is beyond me. But Khamzat is DDP's toughest matchup. Like I said, I think his grappling is going to be too much for Dricus. I think Dricus will be able to match Khamzat in the strength. And it's not like I'm 100% confident Khamzat beats him. I do see ways for DDP to be able to beat him. If anyone is going to beat Khamzat right now, it is Dricus du Plessis in my opinion. A lot of people are picking DDP to win, and I do understand that. He's maybe a bit more proven in there against the higher level opposition. And let's not forget, DDP has also got a finish win over Robert Whittaker. However, we've seen DDP improve over his last number of fights, but they've all really been against strikers. Khamzat is the first high level grappler we're going to see DDP fight in a very, very long time. If my memory serves me right, I think DDP was taken down and controlled a bit by Derek Brunson. Bruh. Which just isn't a good sign when he's going in there against Khamzat. Look, the key to victory for DDP is to outlast Khamzat and make him really work early on in the opening rounds. And if you are picking DDP to beat Khamzat, you are basically banking on DDP being able to make it out of the earlier rounds with Khamzat. But I just have a funny feeling that Khamzat is just going to I just, for some reason, think he's going to submit Dricus du Plessis inside 2 rounds in their matchup. That's what I think is going to happen, although I want DDP to win. But this is definitely his toughest matchup. I think it's maybe 60-40 in favour of Khamzat Chimaev, in my opinion. Moving on to his next hardest matchup, we've got Nassourdine Imavov. Now, Imavov, in my opinion, you might look at his record and go 16-4. It's not that great. This guy has been doing a lot of really good work in the middleweight division. Obviously, he has lost to Sean Strickland, but since then, he's went on and beat Roman Dolidze, Jared Cannonier, Brendan Allen, and most recently knocked out Israel Adesanya. The Brendan Allen win is another one that really sticks out for me, in my opinion, because Brendan Allen was on a 7-fight win streak going into that matchup, and I think Brendan Allen is super underrated in this division. Look, Nassourdine Imavov, I don't think he beats Dricus du Plessis. I think he gives us a very fun matchup against DDP. The guy's extremely powerful on the feet, great kickboxer, good grappling. Let's not forget, this guy was born in Dagestan, so he is a Dagestani. So he has that wrestling in his back pocket. Although I just see DDP being a bit tricky for Imavov to figure out on the feet. I don't think he would have the success in the grappling like a Khamzat Chimaev. And Nassourdine Imavov does slow down in matchups. We've seen him visibly slow down at wasn't even really a high pace fight against Brendan Allen, and DDP does bring that pace. Similar to Khamzat, who doesn't really have a good gas tank. I just trust in Khamzat's grappling a bit more and his finishing ability a bit more than Nassourdine Imavov, if that makes sense. I think this would be a really fun fight. The guy's extremely slept on. Yes, he has lost to Sean Strickland, who DDP has beaten twice, but if you go back and watch Nassourdine Imavov's performances from the Sean Strickland fight to where he is now, coming off that win over Israel Adesanya. I know Adesanya was on a losing streak, still a great win in my opinion. I think Nassourdine Imavov is super slept on and arguably deserves to fight for the middleweight title more than Khamzat Chimaev. Moving on to the overrated section. Look, I have got Sean Strickland. Sean Strickland, don't get me wrong, is a great fighter. He had one of the biggest upsets of all time against Israel Adesanya. I think that matchup against Adesanya is the perfect example of styles make fights, because everyone was picking, including myself, Israel Adesanya to style on Sean Strickland in there, and it just didn't happen. And Sean Strickland actually showed a very visible hole in Israel Adesanya's game. Obviously had a very competitive fight against Dricus du Plessis as well, but in the rematch we just seen the levels between Sean Strickland and Dricus du Plessis. And I think this is a thing with Sean Strickland. The guy is a great fighter, but is very one-dimensional and does not adapt his style. I even think him versus Adesanya 2 would be very different from their first fight, because I think Israel Adesanya would make the correct adjustments in to make the fight a bit more competitive. I actually think Adesanya would maybe take the rematch, to be honest. That might be a really hot take, but Sean Strickland's style never adapts. He is always the same fighter. He always fights the exact same way. And I think there's fighters below him in the rankings that have, and I think would beat him. That's why I have him here. Moving on, another one. Look, I'm not going to say Caio Borralho is extremely overrated. The reason why I have him in the overrated section is because I see a lot of people saying it should be him, Imavov next, comparing him to the likes of Imavov, saying he's going to be a future champion. And don't get me wrong, I think Borralho is a very, very talented fighter. Just need to see more. I have him here. There were a couple of other options, but the way people speak about Imavov, I think he is slightly overrated. I mean, his best win is Jared Cannonier. Now, when we move on to the underrated section, you might say I'm a bit of a hypocrite here and contradict myself. I think I can explain myself better, so I've kind of give away who I think who is going to be in the underrated section. But outside of Cannonier, his best win is Paul Craig. Yeah, you know what I mean? Like, the silence was deafening there. I could hear you all sitting there thinking, going, fuck, I'm sitting there saying Borralho's going to be champion, but really, outside of Cannonier's best win is Paul Craig. You know what I mean? I'm not saying the guy is, like, really overrated and he's shit, because I don't think he is shit. I think he is very well-rounded. My thing with Caio Borralho is, I think a lot of people overrate his ability, and we just haven't seen enough of him yet. That's why I have him here, to be honest. Moving on to the underrated section. A lot of people would probably have Anthony Hernandez here. Look, I was tempted on putting Anthony Hernandez in the overrated section, which would, again, make me seem a bit of a hypocrite if I have Brendan Allen in the underrated section, since Anthony Hernandez just beat him. But I think whenever people say Anthony Hernandez is like a future middleweight champion, I don't see it. I think he can be a top contender, yes, but I don't think he's got the ability to become champion, in my opinion, in this division. I think Anthony Hernandez is a bit undersized, and the way that he doesn't deal well with body shots, I think sooner rather than later, this guy is going to be stopped. But Brendan Allen, in my opinion, has an IQ issue at times, and his big problem is submission over position. That is Brendan Allen's biggest weakness, and we've seen it in the matchup against Anthony Hernandez. We've seen it multiple matchups with Brendan Allen. This guy constantly chases a finish, which again, you have to celebrate, you have to congratulate the guy for that. He wants to get his opponents out of there, but sometimes it is at his own detriment, where he could stay on the back of somebody, have the hooks in, and ride out the round and definitely win himself that round. But instead, he'll chase the submission. He'll end up being too high up on somebody's back. They'll shake him off, and then he's on bottom half and he's lost the round. Bit of an IQ problem with Brendan Allen, but a lot of people sleep on this guy. He was on a 7-fight win streak. I think he is definitely better than what his ranking would suggest. He's also got pretty good boxing as well. Can't slow down in the later rounds, but he's got good grappling. Again, if he would just prioritise position over submission, I think he would have a lot more success in that department. And he's got good boxing. I think this guy is slept on. Do I think Brendan Allen will be champion? Absolutely not. But I think this guy is definitely better than what his ranking would suggest. Moving on to another underrated fighter.
Bruh.
Again, people, I don't know if I can explain myself properly here. In my head before I hit record, I think I could. I'm not saying Jared Cannonier is going to become a champion. I think his days of competing in the UFC for the middleweight title are gone, well gone. But I think this guy has a lot more to give. And I actually think with some people above him in the rankings, with the people that are above him in the rankings, I still think he would beat them. Like, I think Jared Cannonier would have an extremely close matchup. I think he would probably look even better than what he done first time round against Sean Strickland in the rematch, purely based off the fact of he knows what Sean Strickland's going to be when he goes in there. Second time round, Strickland never adapts, so I think Jared Cannonier would actually have a good performance second time round against Strickland, actually better than what he had first time around. And I just think he can keep it competitive still with a lot of people above him in the rankings. Let's just see who is above Cannonier in the rankings. Like, right, actually, let me see. Maybe I need to rethink. Maybe I've messed up here with... No, actually, because he was competitive with Nassim Imavov, that was an early stoppage. I think he would look really good in there against Sean Strickland second time round. Maybe skip out these three. He looked okay against Baralho. Baralho clearly won that matchup. I'd favour him against Roman Dolidze. I think he would actually beat Anthony Hernandez. He's beat Marvin Vettori, he'd beat him again. I think... Would he beat Brendan Allen? I'm not too sure if he'd beat Brendan Allen, actually. I think he'd beat Paulo Costa, and then I don't think any of the... I think he beat Michel Pereira. I think Ren de Ritter I need to see a bit more of before I comment on him, and he would beat Roman Kopylov. So there's a lot of ranked guys that, in my opinion, Jared Cannonier can still beat. I think a lot of people say the guy's washed, and I think he proved that he isn't washed, especially in the Gregory Rodriguez matchup where he took a lot of damage in there, faced a lot of adversity. Obviously, Gregory Rodriguez isn't like the bee's knees, the best of the division, but he had a really good account of himself in there and getting the victory over him. And in his matchup against Baralho, there were some promising moments. He was winning the early stages of the fight against Imavov. Yes, he is 406 years of age, but I still do think he's underrated, and a lot of people in the division that he can still beat. There, I think I redeemed myself. Into the prospects, starting off with this guy right here. He is going to be a title challenger one day. That is Ikram Aliskerov. A lot of people might only know him for his loss against Robert Whittaker, but this guy, before the fight against Robert Whittaker, his only loss in there was to Khamzat Chimaev years ago. So this guy is 2-1 in the UFC with 6 wins coming by way of KO. 6 wins coming by way of KO. This is throughout his MMA career, and 5 wins coming by way of sub. Ikram Aliskerov, I think it's only a matter of time before this guy is in the top 10. I think he is really, really talented. A good striker. He's extremely powerful on the feet. People might say about his chin because Whittaker isn't that big of a puncher. He took the fight on short notice, so I'm going to be a bit more lenient with him on that one. The guy is really, really good at grappling as well. If there's anybody that's a prospect that you need to look out for in this division, I know he's 32, so it's hard to say, he's a pro, like, it's, you know, like a prospect's maybe like 23, 24, 25 in that range. But this is definitely one to watch in the middleweight division. If I had my pick of who I think's outside of the rankings that will get into the rankings and be a top contender one day, it is Ikram Aliskerov. And finally, another one. This is a pretty obvious one. It's Joe Pyfer. Look, I think Joe Pyfer is an extremely powerful puncher. Guy compares his power to Ngannou. Don't know if I'd go that far, but he's also a great grappler as well. Even go back and look at his submission matchups. This he's a lot younger than what Ikram is as well, so he maybe fits the prospect mold a bit better. But in the UFC's 4-1, obviously he did kind of get fraud checked against Jack Hermansson. He has 9 wins come by way of KO throughout his entire career and 3 submission wins. Obviously, in the Jack Hermansson fight, his lead leg got tore up. This was his first main event over 5 rounds in the UFC. And Jack Hermansson is a tricky outing for anybody. But since then, he bounced back against Andre Barriault, I believe. It was UFC 303, knocked him out in the first round. Obviously, he was meant to fight Kevin Gastelum, but he got sick or something, had to pull out. Joe Pyfer is definitely one to watch. Underrated grappling, in my opinion, and is very, very heavy-handed. This guy, and he's still young at 28 years of age, he will be up there in the rankings, definitely in the near future. So let me know, do you like these style of videos? I've done one for the lightweight division earlier on my channel, like 2 weeks ago, I think. So make sure you go there and watch that video. Again, thanks for all the support, and as always, like, share, subscribe, comment, all that good stuff, and I will see you again in the next one.